I want to take a different spin on explaining agentic AI, or agentic RAG, by looking at it from the point of view of the developer, or how we see it. So I'll talk through legacy RAG, which came around before we had something, a facility in the models called tool calls. I'll show you a little bit tool calls and how that works, and then we'll put that together to get a kind of better understanding of agentic RAG. So what we're going to do is take a prompt that the model shouldn't know anything about. And if you haven't seen it, by the way, this is typically how we call a large language model. So the API, in this case, we're using OpenAI, but for each model, whether it's Gemini or a local model, the API is the same, where we basically make a call, we say which model we want to use, and then we pass in some messages. Now, the first message here has the role of system, and that's what we call the system prompt. So what I'm saying to the model here, if you don't know the answer, then just say so, okay? And then the second message is our actual prompt, what we want to pass through. So if I cut and paste that and call it. So what the result we got back is, I do not have enough information. Great, okay? When we look at RAG, we have this kind of RAG pipeline. So we take the user's query, then we actually do a lookup and we pull back some document chunks. So we're assuming the users kind of configured the system with some documents that are relevant to the questions. We put the user's query together with the results of pulling out the user's documents and send that to the model. So what does that look like from the developer's point of view? So firstly, we need to take the user's query. How do I replace the rotor blades? And we pass it to something called an embeddings model. And that's going to look something like this. So we've turned the user's query into basically a whole bunch of numbers, which is what we use for a lookup on our vector database. Then what we would do is we take those numbers, and here they're represented by $1. So in this case, this is a select statement that would run on top of Postgres, and Postgres would have an extension called pgvector. And what that will do is it will pull back what we call chunks, but they're kind of like the documents that you've uploaded, the text from those documents, not all of the text. It's pulled back with what we call a similarity search. So it's anything that kind of looks relevant to your actual query, okay? So then what we do in that context, we've still got our system prompt, but this time what we're saying is answer using the provided context, okay? We've got the user's original question, and then what we have is another message, which is the content. So it's that everything that we pulled back from the vector database, these chunks of text, they get pushed into the prompt, okay? So when the model receives it, it's got the user's question, and it's kind of it's got more or less, hopefully, the answer to that question, and it kind of goes through and comes up with a summary, basically, of what you've already told it. What are the problems with that? Well, the main problem is if the content we pull back is not quite right because somehow the vector search didn't work, then we're not going to get the right answer to the question. And it's also a kind of one-shot search. So for each query that the user has, we pull out the data, hoping for the best, pass it to the model, and get an answer, okay? Tool calls. Tool calls came after the kind of legacy RAG. So let's have a look at what that looks like. So we've got our normal API call that we make, and we can pass in messages, but we've got a new section called tools. And what we do here is we say to the model, hey, we have some functions that you can call. So the model can look at the prompt that we pass in, and then it can look through the tools and say, actually, to answer this question, I need to make this tool call. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, so we've got a response from the model. So this time, rather than a big kind of bunch of text in the reply, we have something called a tool call request. And what it's done, it's taken one of the tool definitions that we've passed in, this lookup drone manual, and it's decided that it wants to call it. So passing in the arguments, it wants to call lookup drone manual section with a query that is Falcon X2 drone rotor blade replacement procedure. So what happens there then, with Agentic RAG, we kind of take away this legacy RAG system and we replace it with these tool calls. So we're not going to pass in the context that we've pulled from a vector database, not yet at least. What we're going to do is say to the model, hey, you've got the capability to do RAG, and here are the functions that you need to do it. And in this case, we're saying the function that we're going to give it, the tool, is called search context. So for this query, the model comes back and says, great, call that function for me. Okay, so we go away and we go back to our RAG pipeline, and instead of the query and getting the data from the database, we've got a tool call. We make our query to the database with the query that the model gave to us, and then we pass it back to the model. But the critical difference is the model doesn't have to stop there. The model can give an answer if it wants, but if it's not happy with the data that was pulled back, it can actually go away and make more tool calls. And this is why we have that agentic approach. So it's the model can choose from different tools until it's happy that it's got enough information to give the correct answer. Okay, so we can see the main differences there between this legacy RAG and agentic. The model can make the tool call. It doesn't have to make a tool call. So perhaps you're attached to a RAG system, but the query that you're making has nothing to do with the documents there. The model might choose not to call the tool at all. And then we've got this kind of cycle where the tool can make repeated requests to the database to keep searching through the data to get the exact data that it wants. Okay, I hope that helps you to see the sort of main differences between this legacy RAG and agentic RAG, and how agentic RAG can be much more powerful, actually. There's a little side quest, what we can also do, or what you can do in different tools. So for example, here I'm in ChatGPT, is just ask the model, what tools do you support? And then it's really interesting to see what we've got. For example, with ChatGPT, there's something that runs Python code, so that if you ever ask ChatGPT to create graphs and stuff like that, it's going to run this. Python automations, so it can schedule reminders, Gmail, Google Contacts, and image generation. So it's coming with a lot of tools packed in, and you can do the same thing with the coding tools or the agentic coding tools. Ask them what tools they've got, and you'll get a list. It's just really interesting to see how these things work in the background. Okay, so that's the end of this video. If you want to see more content like that, then you want to click on this video here that Google's going to recommend to you, and I would appreciate a subscription. Thanks very much.